This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Gracian, and tonight's top stories from East Asia. 10 years after the landmark South China Sea arbitral ruling, the Philippines says it should serve as a reference to a future code of conduct. China insists the decision has no place in the negotiations. And Typhoon Bavi leaves at least 15 people dead in the Philippines and is barreling towards Taiwan, where more than 1,000 people have evacuated from high-risk areas. Chinese President Xi Jinping meets North Korean Premier Park Tae-sung in Beijing, just as Pyongyang pledges to strengthen its nuclear force. SK Hynix, one of the world's top memory chip makers, set to trade in less than 4 hours after raising the most for a foreign listing in the U.S. Also tonight, while China's football ambition is falling short despite substantial investments, amateur leagues are giving fans a reason to cheer. Our top story this hour, Philippine Foreign Minister Maria Teresa Lazaro says the 2016 South China Sea arbitration ruling remains an unshakable permanent anchor of the rules-based international order. Ms. Lazaro adds that Manila will use the ruling to push for a legally binding code of conduct between ASEAN and China in the disputed South China Sea. This weekend marks the 10th anniversary of the landmark arbitral award, which found Beijing's sweeping claims over most of the sea had no basis under international law.
The seas are calm, navigation is simple. But when the waters grow turbulent, when unilateral claims cloud the horizon, and when the shadow of coercion looms, nations need something far more permanent than political convenience. They need a lighthouse.
Beijing hit back, reiterating its opposition to the ruling. It stressed it should not be used to influence ongoing talks between China and ASEAN on a South China Sea Code of Conduct.
中方已经多次阐明，所谓裁决非法无效，没有拘束力。中国不接受、不承认，我们也不会接受任何基于该裁决的主张和行动。中国始终致力于同东盟国家加快推进磋商，争取早日达成准则，共同维护南海和平稳定。所谓裁决与准则毫无关系，非方不要以所谓裁决给准则的达成制造障碍。
In recent years, tensions between China and the Philippines have escalated over competing claims in the disputed waters. Both sides have clashed over maritime rights, territory, and access to resources. And the diplomatic friction has also spread beyond the contested region, with the latest involving Chinese claims over Batanes, a Philippine island province situated near Taiwan, after Chinese scholars argued it was historically linked to China. Manila has strongly rejected such claim. We'll get more insights on whether the arbitral ruling had any real impact when we speak with Bill Hayton, Associate Fellow of Chatham House's Asia Pacific program, later this hour. Typhoon Bavi is wreaking havoc as it sweeps across parts of Asia. At least 15 people are dead in the Philippines from a landslide triggered by the storm. A time lapse captured this water sprout in Japan's Hatoma, spawned by intense winds. The typhoon is projected to barrel past a southwestern Japanese island chain and Taiwan's northeastern shores early Saturday morning. Japanese authorities have issued the second highest evacuation order, advising residents in coastal and vulnerable areas to leave for safety immediately. Residents of the remote island chain in the storm's path are bracing for impact. All ferry services have been canceled, and airlines have grounded more than 200 flights throughout Sunday. Some 40,000 passengers have been affected, and the storm could be the region's most destructive in years. The typhoon, spanning about 1,000 kilometers across, is the largest to hit the region in decades, and while the storm has been downgraded from a super typhoon, it's still packing destructive winds of more than 160 kilometers per hour. And for more, we're joined by our CNA senior correspondents, Victoria Jen in Taipei and Tan Yuguan in Shanghai. Victoria, let's start with you. So Typhoon Bavi is edging closer to Taiwan by the hour, but by the looks of it, it isn't raining hard right now, but authorities are still bracing for this. Tell us more.
Yes, right now I'm standing in Neihu, a business district in Taipei. And normally this hour, the streets are packed with cars and people heading home from work. But as you can see, there's barely any traffic and any pedestrians on the street. That's because schools and works have been canceled due to typhoon. Now, so far, we have only experienced some drizzles. So we're not feeling the full impact of the typhoon as it continues to move. But that is going to change within the next couple of hours because the typhoon is moving in close. It's closing in on Taiwan, and now it is one of the biggest typhoon to threaten Taiwan in decades. So authorities are not taking any chances. The military has already deployed nearly 30,000 troops on standby for any emergency and rescue missions. Taiwan Power Company has also placed 7,000 people in case there is any widespread power disruption. At the same time, in terms of traffic and transportations, there's also been some disruptions. Now, ferry services to offshore islands have been suspended, and hundreds of international and domestic airlines and their flights have been canceled as a result. School and works in many parts of northern Taiwan have been closed as a result of the typhoon. Now, the authorities are most concerned about the typhoon is the rain because forecast says that it's likely to bring up to 1 meter of rain within the next 24 hours to some mountainous areas. Now that's equivalent to half a Taiwan's annual rainfall within such a short period of time. So you can imagine that's a lot of rainwater being squeezed into Taiwan in such a short period of time. So it's raising concerns that it's going to cause flooding in low-lying areas and landslides in mountainous areas. Another concern is the speed of the typhoon because we are noticing that it's slowing down. So this is going to likely to cause even more destructions. So officials are definitely keeping a close watch as the situation develops.
Definitely worth keeping a watch. Even though it's drizzling now, we are expecting heavy rain and, as you mentioned, heavy destruction to hit Taiwan soon. But let's head over to you now, Yuguan, as landfall is estimated to be a day plus away from mainland China. And some forecast to be an area region near Wenzhou City, which is some 300 plus kilometers away from where you are right now. What type of emergency measures have local authorities taken so far?
You're right, Grace. The landfall is about a day away from mainland China. And from where I am in Shanghai, it's expected much further south from here, between Zhejiang and Fujian province. But that's an important point we need to note here is that Bavi has kind of lost its eye. And that essentially means the system is, in a way, has spread out. The eye has become less distinct. And that it really doesn't mean that the danger has passed. In fact, now the storm is essentially twice the size of France. And that means that even places like Shanghai and Hangzhou, which are not directly hit, would also feel the effects of Typhoon Bavi. That's why, in Shanghai, we are already seeing some precautions being taken. But in areas that are hardest hit, like Zhejiang and the Fujian coast, local authorities are really into typhoon readiness mode. They are getting fishing boats to return to harbor. They're evacuating residences in older buildings or in low-lying areas to take them out of harm's way before the storm's arrival. Meanwhile, reservoirs, flooding is also quite a focus here in those areas. Reservoirs are being drained ahead of time so that they have capacity for the deluge that is to come. Now, here in Shanghai, really, the mood is somewhat cautious. We kind of know that the typhoon would not hit us directly, but the storm would, and therefore, even in the office buildings, we are seeing typhoon warnings to warn people that take precautions when they are going out and avoid going out altogether. This includes service providers like those providers for apartments, service apartments. They're issuing warnings for residents to clear their balconies ahead of the storm. Now, of course, there are some practical worries as well. Some people are worrying about whether they have enough groceries to tide over the weekend, and therefore there has been some talk of stocking up on groceries ahead of this weekend.
All right. Many thanks to the both of you. That was CNA senior correspondent Tan Yuguan in Shanghai and Victoria Jen in Taipei on the preparations made ahead of Typhoon Bavi. And we'll head out for a short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Japan's wholesale inflation picking up pace to its fastest in more than 3 years in June, bolstering the case for the Bank of Japan to hike interest rates. Plus, the world's largest crypto platform, Binance, sets its sights on aggressive expansion in Asia, even as co-CEO Richard Tung tells CNA it's committed to the European Union despite a licensing setback. Welcome back. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and now Roland Lim is here with your business news. Roland, Asian markets are higher today, led mostly by tech stocks, and especially chip giant SK Hynix set to make its debut in just a few hours, right?
Yes, right. It's a breathtaking $26.5 billion share listing on the Nasdaq. And this is despite lingering worries about elevated valuations and eye-watering capital expenditure spending in AI. The South Korean chipmaker has made Wall Street history by raising the most money in a foreign American depository receipt, or ADR, listing. And it is also the second largest share sale in the US, behind SpaceX's record IPO. The company priced its ADRs at $149 each. SK Hynix says that represents a 2.7% premium to its average share price over the past 3 trading days. 10 ADRs represent 1 Seoul-traded common share. In Seoul, the company's shares closed marginally lower today at more than 2 million Korean won apiece. For more analysis on the chipmaker's U.S. trading debut tonight, let's bring in Peter Kim. He is Global Investment Strategist at KB Financial Group. Peter, good to have you on the show. Now, it's been a pretty volatile week for Korean stocks, with the Kospi briefly slipping into bear territory. What does that tell you, or does that question gives you pause about the durability for the demand for SK Hynix once it actually starts trading?
Maybe in the short term. I mean, given the outside gains that both Hynix and Samsung Electronics had from last year, I mean, you couldn't blame any investors for taking profit. Now, when you mentioned about the demanding valuations, on a trailing basis, they may be demanding, but if you look forward 12 months, they're at single digits. So I think the demand for SK's listing in the US, I think it's 7 times oversubscribed. I think that indicates how institutional investors feel about that.
And for viewers less familiar with ADRs, can you quickly explain what it means for these shares that are trading on NASDAQ in US dollars versus the local listing in Seoul?
Right. Well, the listing today represents about 2.5% of outstanding shares for SK Hynix. SK Hynix until today was only available on Korean Stock Exchange. Korea has a fairly restrictive ID system, which prevents a lot of the institutional investors, even the globally well-known ones, to access easily. So this listing allows whole group of institutional investors and some individuals to be able to buy SK Hynix shares, and that should not only provide a lot more liquidity globally, but also hopefully it'll lead to higher valuations.
And if the conversion between the Seoul shares and the NASDAQ ADRs is limited, could the ADRs then trade at a premium? I mean, for retail investors, does that make the NASDAQ listing easier to access but potentially more expensive?
That's right. We do have a similar case many years ago when TSMC from Taiwan listed their ADRs, and they still traded a reasonable premium. So Korean regulators have suggested the idea of maybe allowing more fungible conversion between the two, local and the US, and that's probably will happen if the US listing starts to cause significant premium. And that should ease a lot of the investor concerns about potential for arbitrage.
Peter, SK Hynix currently trades at a lower forward multiple as compared to its competitor Micron. This is despite its strong position in the high bandwidth memory chip sector. Is this a clear example of the so-called Korean discount? And do you think the NASDAQ listing will actually help close that gap?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, two stock markets have very different listing requirements. For what it's worth, globally, it is considered the US listing is a lot more stringent in terms of requirements. So for SK Hynix to be first list its ADRs, not only provides certain more comfort and confidence for amongst investors, and also just from a liquidity and marketing standpoint, just to bring its profile, because you'd still be surprised how many clients in the US that I meet, very not that familiar with SK Hynix or the Korean market for that matter.
Okay, so the deal, though, was more than 7 times oversubscribed, which is huge. Does that tell you that there's confidence in SK Hynix, specifically just how strong is demand with AI-related names right now?
Absolutely. I mean, the past couple of weeks been very volatile. I think it's more got to do with just the simple consolidation technical reasons rather than deep fundamentals. Obviously, nothing can go up 2-3% every day. If you consider SpaceX IPO was 4 times oversubscribed versus 7 for SK Hynix, I think that already tells you between the two issues, which one is the much more sought after. I think for global investors, I think semiconductor story is still very compelling. Again, I go back to fundamentals. Earnings are very solid. Visibility is high, and based on those earnings, valuations still at a deep discount.
Okay, we will definitely be following very closely as to how the shares are doing trading later this evening. That was Peter Kim, Global Investment Strategist at KB Financial Group. Next, chip semiconductor ended its first day of trade in Hong Kong flat after raising about $890 million. The partially state-owned wafer foundry joined the deluge of offerings in China linked to AI this year. The onshore stock dropped 17% in Shanghai. Meantime, stocks in Greater China closed deep in the red, while the Hang Seng Index, though it did manage to gain 0.6%. Tencent shares, though, however, falling by 2%. Tech giant may become the biggest shareholder of Manus. Now, it's reportedly in talks to take the largest stake in the AI agentic startup as Meta unwinds its $2 billion acquisition. Now, Beijing had forced an unraveling of the deal, citing breaches of investment rules. Manus is expected to continue to operate independently from Singapore. Now, Binance turns 9 this month, but the world's largest crypto exchange is dealing with a fresh setback in Europe, days after withdrawing its EU license bid under the bloc's new MiCA rules for crypto assets last month. Now, I spoke with co-CEO Richard Teng, who explained what comes next.
So we are still working very closely with the regulators in EU. We are very supportive of the EU agenda and MiCA itself. It's very unfortunate, I think, The Greece application took much longer than what we expected, and we worked very closely with the Greek regulator. So, we are always given the impression that we have a fully compliant application. It's on course to be approved much earlier, and then there was delayed. But we can't delay much further because there's a timeline, and we need to be responsible to our users in EU, which is why we withdraw. But rest assured, we are still working very closely. We are still very supportive. Users are safe. But a very interesting data point, right? So, of the funds that from our EU users that withdraw, 70% of it goes to self-hosted wallets and not to other EU regulated entities. And that speaks volume because, it goes to self-hosted wallet. Regulators have no visibility, in terms of AML risk, etc. In terms of risk, actually, it is a much higher risk profile and exposure for regulators. So I'm not quite sure whether that meets Michael's objective on that front.
Binance turns 9 this month. The company has gone from a crypto disruptor to, as you say, one of the most regulated financial platforms around. What's been the biggest difference compared to 2017 when you were first formed and today? What more needs to be done?
Binance started in 2017. At that point in time, there were only 6 million people around the world with crypto exposure. Today, we are closer to 740 million people around the world with crypto exposure. So you can see the exponential growth, right? Half of them are on our platform as users. But the next leg forward, you're going to see crypto as part of the financial infrastructure. A lot more assets will be put on chain, as I mentioned, whether it's commodities, whether it's equities, pre-IPO offerings, etc. And we are supporting all those developments.
Institutional adoption of crypto has accelerated. Does that make crypto safer, do you think, make it more correlated to traditional risk assets?
Well, whether it's correlated or otherwise, it really depends, right? Sometimes, based on trends, sometimes it is quite correlated to NASDAQ, other times it's not. But to me, it is a very good testament of the maturity coming on stream into this sector, right? So I got involved in 2017, and I always believed that blockchain is going to be the future of financial services. For that to take place, you need two elements. One, you need clear regulations, and you need different type of investors with different risk appetite, horizon, duration, for it to be a much healthier marketplace, which we are seeing now, and is now becoming part of global infrastructure and landscape. So I'm actually very happy to see all this development coming through.
Meantime, Japanese producer prices rose at its fastest pace last month in more than 3 years, boosting the case for the Bank of Japan to continue raising rates. The PPI rose 7.1% on year in June, continuing a string of spikes since the start of the war on Iran, which has caused oil, energy, and plastic prices to surge. That's coupled with a weak yen, pushing up raw materials import bill. The yen-based import price index in June rose 29.7% from a year earlier at its quickest pace since October 22. The central bank will take this into account in its policy meeting later this month, where it is expected to keep benchmark rates steady, but will be releasing fresh quarterly growth and price forecasts. And that is the latest in business. Back to you, Grace.
Thanks, Roland, for those updates. Now, we'll go for a short break, but coming back on East Asia Tonight, 10 years since a landmark South China Sea ruling, and tensions and clashes still continue over one of Asia's biggest maritime disputes. What lies ahead for one of the world's most contested waterways? Well, we'll be getting insights from Chatham House's Bill Hayton right after the break. Hello again. You're joining us on East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Beijing reiterates rejection of a ruling that invalidates its South China Sea claim. The Philippines says the decade-old decision should serve as a reference for a code of conduct in the disputed waters. China, Japan, and Taiwan brace for the arrival of Typhoon Bavi as the largest storm to hit the region in decades churns through the Pacific. South Korean chipmaker making Wall Street history following a $26.5 billion share sale. But its trading debut in the U.S. will be a key test of the durability of the AI boom after a recent pullback in semiconductor stocks. This weekend marks the 10th anniversary of the 2016 South China Sea arbitration ruling. The Permanent Court of Arbitration had ruled that Beijing's claims over most of the sea had no basis under international law. It was a major legal victory for Manila, but Beijing refused to join the arbitration initiated by the Philippines in 2013 and rejects the ruling as a sham. Tensions since then have sometimes resulted in violent confrontations. Filipino fishermen say little has changed.
Hindi ko nararamdaman hanggang pagkapanalo niyan kasi hanggang ngayon ay hindi pa naman kami malaya na pumunta ng Scarborough. Kaya malungkot para sa amin na mga isang Pilipino. Hindi kami nakakapunta doon ng yung papayapa ang namin, isipan at kalooban. Ang gusto namin ay makapunta kami ng malaya.
Hanggang sa umabot sa puntong umabot na tayo sa 10 taon nung pagkapanalo natin, pero wala namang nakaramdam nun. Dahil para sa amin, mas lumalala yung nangyayaring pangharas at panggigipit ng mga Chinese Coast Guard sa amin.
The ruling remains a major fault line in regional geopolitics, and to unpack its significance in the future of the South China Sea disputes, we're joined by Bill Hayton, Associate Fellow of the Asia-Pacific Program at Chatham House. Bill, thanks for joining us. Now, this weekend marks 10 years since the landmark South China Sea arbitral ruling, but China has, from day one, rejected everything. And if Beijing hasn't changed course, can we say there has been any legacy or changes since?
There's a legacy in the sense that we now know legally pretty much where we stand. But the reason why the Philippines brought the case in the first place was because it wanted to be able to drill for gas in the South China Sea and for its fisher people to be protected. And neither of those things has happened. So you could say that the ruling was a Pyrrhic victory for the Philippines. You know, it's won in principle that China's maritime claims were ruled incompatible with international law. But it hasn't been able to do what it wants, which is to get greater access to the resources that lie off its coast.
Exactly. As you mentioned, the Philippines has consistently cited the ruling, and it has been telling to the international society that, in fact, it does have ownership over the waterways. But can Manila realistically uphold the award while still pursuing cooperation with Beijing?
Well, I think it would like to think that it can, and it looks at other countries around the region. I mean, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, all attempt to do various, resource extraction from the South China Sea, but with greater or lesser success. And so I think they would like to, to carry on. I mean, they certainly continue to trade with China. Chinese investment in the Philippines is not that, significant these days. So maybe they're paying a price there. But I think, it hasn't really impacted, Philippines' economic growth, for example. So I think they're determined to hold firm. They see this as an important victory, one that they won on behalf of the region. I think it would be the way that people in Manila look at it. And I guess they're they would like more support from the region for that. But they're aware that the other, Southeast Asian countries, feel constrained in what they can say and do.
Mm. And speaking of how the region takes this in, ASEAN continues to reaffirm UNCLOS, but it rarely refers to the arbitral ruling itself. And do you think ASEAN has failed to turn one of its strongest legal tools into a coherent regional strategy?
I think there are just differences between the now 11 members of ASEAN, and some of them are obviously states that face the South China Sea, and there are others that don't and have completely different interests. And I think those that are most concerned with the South China Sea, and that's probably about half of ASEAN, see the value of the ruling. Others, would see that it's less important and that their interests in their relationships with China pull them in different ways. So it's interesting. I mean, the Philippines is the chair of ASEAN right now, But you don't really, I'm here in Manila for various sort of events to mark the 10th anniversary of the ruling. But I'm not really hearing the Philippine side really calling on ASEAN to sort of do much to implement the ruling. It's almost as if they've kind of, sort of given up on ASEAN being able to do much with the ruling, frankly.
But Bill, then how can we read into that with the Philippines, as you said, not taking too much action on bringing ASEAN together on this front?
Well, I guess there are many things that they're thinking about. I mean, as the chair of ASEAN this year, the Philippines has a very broad agenda. And I think maybe it would like to make some progress on the ASEAN-China Code of Conduct on the South China Sea. Although, frankly, I don't see much sign of that actually happening, because the point of the Code of Conduct from ASEAN's perspective is to try and constrain China's behavior. And China, I think, doesn't want its behavior constrained. So they keep going round the same old issues without resolution. So I think it's unlikely that there'll be any serious progress on a code of conduct this year or frankly ever, unless the Southeast Asians give up their main negotiating points. But I think what they want is a continued affirmation of the importance of the ruling, of the importance of UNCLOS, the importance of international law. And I think they'll get that because other Southeast Asian countries, also see the value of those things. But they're just not going to get the wholehearted support that they would like in their actual confrontations with China in the sea.
Right. And speaking of China not wanting to be constrained in the region, it actually recently proposed a common fishing area around the Scarborough Shoal. How should Manila interpret that proposal?
It's a very strange idea because the arbitral ruling 10 years ago actually said that was what should happen. It said, that there was evidence that this had been a traditional fishing ground for a very long period, and that the Chinese fishermen, Vietnamese and Philippine fishermen should have the right all to use the Scarborough Shoal as a common fishing ground. But of course, that hasn't happened. The Chinese Coast Guard has been frequently chasing away Philippines fishing boats. So quite what the Chinese ambassador thought he was proposing, I'm not sure, unless he was basically saying, we, the Chinese government, will generously allow Philippine fishing boats to use the Scarborough Shoal, basically under our protection, which is the complete opposite of what the arbitral ruling was supposed to say, which was that this was a common fishing area. It made no ruling about which country was the rightful owner of the Scarborough Shoal. It simply said that those three states had the right, the fisher people from those three states had the right to use the Scarborough Shoal, whereas China basically seems to be saying, we own it, and if you're nice, we'll let you use it.
Well, thank you very much for breaking it down all for us. That was Bill Hayton, Associate Fellow of the Asia Pacific Program at Chatham House. In the meantime, North Korea vows to strengthen its nuclear force in quality and quantity as leader Kim Jong-un pledged to modernize the military. The announcement was made during a meeting of the ruling Workers' Party's Central Military Commission yesterday. State media KCNA reported that the meeting also addressed the construction of modern naval bases and upgrades to shipyard capacity. Also discussed were the expansion of the functions and missions of the General Reconnaissance and Intelligence Bureau, Pyongyang's military intelligence agency tasked with operations involving South Korea. And experts expect North Korea to acquire military technology, including surveillance satellites, in return sending troops to aid Russia's war on Ukraine. Meantime, Japan took a step towards allowing its princesses to remain in the imperial family after marriage under proposed changes to a law that its lower house passed on Friday, though they will still not have the right to inherit the throne. And CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida has more.
For Japan, the emperor is the symbol of the state, though he has no political power. His family performs ceremonial functions both within and outside Japan. But there are now only 16 members raising concerns over the sustainability of the imperial family system. There are 5 princesses in the family who are not married, including Aiko, the only child of Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako. Under the imperial house law, princesses who marry a commoner have to leave the imperial family. But they can choose to stay and carry on with their royal duties under what could be the first major revision to the law since it came into effect in 1947. The law limits succession to male heirs, and 19-year-old Hisahito, the nephew of Emperor Naruhito, is the only young eligible heir. But the proposed changes could potentially widen the pool by allowing the imperial family to adopt males aged 15 or older from former branch families. These are families who were stripped of their royal status after World War II. The adopted male cannot succeed the throne, but if he has a son, he could become an heir. This means if Hisahito does not have a son, the son of the adopted male could ascend to the chrysanthemum throne. Analysts say the Takaichi government is giving no chance for Aiko to succeed the throne, even though the idea has support among the Japanese public. 61% are in favor of a reigning empress, according to a poll by major daily Mainichi Shimbun in April. The bill will be sent to the upper house for deliberation. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
We'll head out for a short break, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, why China's amateur football leagues are carrying the hopes and dreams of Chinese fans of the beautiful game.
Fun.
Playing in the World Cup has long been a national goal for China. President Xi Jinping has said he hopes China could one day host and even win the competition, but it's only ever booked a spot once back in the year of 2002. Still, Chinese fans aren't just watching the World Cup from the sidelines this year. They've also been cheering for the country's amateur football players. Provincial football leagues that pit cities against one another have become popular in recent months, and teams are playing to packed stadiums. And for a closer look at what's shaping the Chinese football scene, let's go to CNA Shanghai correspondent Crystal Xia. Crystal, tell us more about the Amateur Football League and how did it get so popular in China?
So the competition that really started it all is the Jiangsu City League, also known as Suchao. That is where 13 cities compete for the title. Last year's winner was Taizhou. So why has this really gotten so popular in China? Well, some say that these amateur leagues are really what football should be about, a genuine love for the sports community. And in China, a country of 1.4 billion people, where people often work and live in cities in other cities that's not their hometown, they often feel a strong sense of loyalty to where they came from. So that's why we are repeatedly seeing attendance records being broken. One match had 60,000 spectators. Now, last year for the 2025 season, there was 2.2 billion live stream views, half of which coming from outside Jiangsu province, demonstrating nationwide popularity. Now, I spoke to someone from Lianyungang in Jiangsu province, and this is what he has to say about the tournament.
我就是因为苏超才看了足球。对，我是江苏人。我反正关注足球，包括关注苏超，就是因为有我家乡的荣誉感。去年就是进了一个球或者失了一个球，情绪会比较波动。现场也有看，网上也有看，大部分都是网上看，因为现场的票很难买的。
Okay, we understand that the fervor around football is big in China, but it hasn't been able to extend to the World Cup this year. How is it that a country of 1.4 billion with so many other sporting achievements is lacking relatively on the World Cup?
So the Chinese national football team is often viewed with a sense of deep disappointment, as well as some mockery, and Chinese state media blames it on corruption, a lack of youth development, and chaotic governance. Now, industry experts say that China's whole nation sports system, which has worked so well for individual Olympic sports such as diving and table tennis, that is incompatible with football, which demands creativity, grassroots competition, and organic talent pipelines. Now let's hear from one fan about his experience watching the World Cup and what his thoughts are on his country's football team.
我们对这一届的世界杯还是有关注的啊！这一次世界杯最有名气啊，最让我们全世界的球迷们知道的，那就叫佛得角。我们喜欢梅西，阿根廷的梅西非常的优秀啊！以前是罗纳尔多双罗呢，现在还有很多的球星也在慢慢成长当中。那我们也祝我们中国足球越来越好。我们中国的足球肯定要改革的，这个必须改革啊！我们不能说国足好不好，只能说中国足球势必进行大部分的改革。
Right, some football fans cheering for football stars like Messi, Ronaldo, but there's no Chinese team on the field. What other teams or people are Chinese people supporting as of now then?
So there is a function on Baidu, which is China's search engine, where people can express support for their favorite players. So coming in first place, Cristiano Ronaldo. Second place, Lionel Messi. No surprise there for those two top stars. And third place is Norway's Erling Haaland. Now he is so popular in China, he's now the face of herbal refreshment drink Wang Laoji. He's being called Ha Bao in China, which means, if I were to translate it quite literally, means baby Ha. And the reason for that is that he's well liked for his personality, his interactions with his fans on social media, and his sense of humor. Now there's somebody else who is on the pitch, not necessarily a player, but who has also got the support from the Chinese. That is referee Ma Ning, who is being nicknamed Card Master because he apparently often dishes out red and yellow cards to the players. There is a joke at the World Cup that he is the best referee because there's no team for him to give preferential treatment to. And he's also become really popular here, such that big brands such as Hayton and Lenovo have used him in their marketing campaigns.
I'm glad to see that there's so many marketing schemes and even nicknames for all of these beloved football players and even referees out there. Now, could you tell us about the prospects of Chinese football?
So the answer is that there's definitely not doom and gloom for Chinese football. As we earlier talked about, there are those amateur leagues for other provinces that have seen how Jiangsu province had really generated such regional pride and also economic activity and consumption whenever it holds a tournament. They have also come up with their own provincial leagues. So we have Dongbeichao, which is Northeast China League, Xiangchao, which is in Hunan province, and many more. There are also other bright spots in the industry. One of them is women's football. Now, they have consistently done better than the men's team and have actually qualified for the 2027 FIFA Women's World Cup. Another group that's really making strides are the youth players. Last month, there's a group of U12 players. They are called the Chinese Football Boys. They won an international tournament in Italy, defeating Everton in the finals. Again, this is a grassroots project. So it has, once again ignited debate about whether this is an alternative pathway for greater achievements in Chinese football beyond the traditional systems. Now let's hear from one 12-year-old football fan about his dreams.
我是看到 C 罗以后我才去踢足球的。我除了世界杯看欧冠，还有那个英超，还有意甲，还有德甲，这5大联赛都看了。我想参加西甲的俱乐部，任何一家俱乐部。然后我为了 每天练球。
So to conclude our discussion on Chinese football, I will quote the coach of that U12 team, well, now U12 champions. He said that more exposure should be given to young players. They need to go overseas to understand high-level competitions and really to get a sense of what football is all about. And for China overall, realistically, it needs to first have a solid footing and just perform at in Asia, deliver results within the Asian region before looking to challenge the bigger international players.
Definitely hoping that China's football future isn't in doom and gloom for young players like we just heard to really achieve their dream. Thank you so much. That was CNA's correspondent Crystal Chia live from Shanghai. And China has successfully tested a sea-based rocket booster recovery system, pulling off its first ever retrieval of an orbital-class rocket. The move marking the first steps to catching up with US-based SpaceX, which has been doing so for years. The booster of the experimental Long March 10B rocket landed on the platform some 6 minutes after separating from the upper stage. And this milestone advances China's push for reusable launch technology, which could significantly reduce the cost and turnaround time for future space missions. It also comes as the U.S. and China remain locked in a growing space rivalry, with both powers vying for technological advantage beyond Earth. Beijing in recent years has accelerated efforts to expand its space industries, all in a bid to narrow its gap with the U.S. And ahead on Asia tonight, here are some stories we'll also be covering. Residents of the southern Malaysian state of Johor goes to the polls tomorrow in what's seen as a bellwether of support for the country's ruling coalition. We'll bring you the latest from the final day of campaigning. Plus, cricket diplomacy on full display, with an Australian domestic league set to be the first foreign franchise to play in India, as Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi wraps up his visit to Australia. Catch all these stories and even more on Asia Tonight, which is at 8 p.m. Singapore-Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And that's this Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia, plus we're on Facebook and YouTube. Enjoy your weekend.
Furious start for the French attack against Morocco in the first quarterfinal at this World Cup, an eagerly anticipated rematch of the 2022 semis. And France had a brilliant chance to take the lead in the first half. Manchester United defender Nosam Mazraoui fouling Kylian Mbappe in the box. But following an unusually long wait, France's all-time leading goal scorer saw his tame penalty saved by Yassine Bono, who was a barrier the French defense could not breach before the break. But France fight ahead in the second half. A magical Mbappe strike on the hour. The marksman shaking off his penalty blues, on target for his 20th World Cup goal, drawing level with Lionel Messi at the top of the goal-scoring charts with his 8th at this tournament. Barricades broken, and the French ran riot. Another star of the offense on target. A fantastic finish off a dynamic dribble by brilliant Ballon d'Or winner Ousmane Dembélé in the 66th for his 5th of the tournament. 2-0, and Morocco praying for a miracle, but despite a late effort from the Atlas Lions, a largely toothless display sees them bow out of the tournament. Their impressive 34-match unbeaten streak snapped by a fabulous French performance. France march into their third straight semi-final, where they will take on either Spain or Belgium.